I abandoned my husband to impress toxic friends. Now he's a millionaire, and I'm begging for help. I traded a devoted husband for friends who abandoned me. When I hit rock bottom and begged my ex for a job, he didn't yell. He just handed me a $2.50 receipt. I remember the exact, terrifying moment the laughter permanently died in my throat. It was exactly 4 p.m. The blistering Mojave Desert sun was violently baking the heavy metal hood of our rented Jeep Wrangler. The heat radiating off the cracked asphalt was actively warping the air, making the horizon look like a rippling, unstable mirage. The digital thermometer on the dashboard read 105 degrees. My best friend, Sloan, was staring silently out the passenger window at the empty, shimmering dirt road. The manic, cruel, high-pitched giggling that had completely filled the car for the last 3 hours had entirely evaporated. The silence in the car was suddenly deafening. It was a heavy, suffocating kind of silence. "He should be here by now," Sloan whispered. Her voice was incredibly thin. It sounded like actual, genuine panic. I gripped the hot leather steering wheel, my palms sweating profusely against the material. It was just the three of us in the Jeep. Me, Sloan, and Gemma. We were exactly 8 miles away from the main highway, completely surrounded by jagged red rocks, deeply cracked earth, and dead, twisted Joshua trees. There was absolutely no shade. There were no other cars. The entire landscape looked like the surface of a hostile, alien planet. We had been enthusiastically, maliciously planning this stupid, arrogant prank all morning over expensive iced coffees in a highly air-conditioned cafe. Just a little scare, we had arrogantly, foolishly told ourselves, stirring our drinks with plastic straws. Let's just see if Mr. Survival is actually as tough as he constantly thinks he is. My name is Sharon Stevens. I am currently 42 years old. But 12 years ago, when I was 30, I made the absolute worst, most indefensible decision a human being can possibly make. I didn't just casually break my marriage vows. I didn't just have a cliché, physical affair, or secretly lie about our shared finances. I took an exceptionally good, deeply devoted man who implicitly trusted me with his actual life, and I knowingly left him in the dirt to suffer for a cheap, fleeting laugh. The weekend trip to the desert had originally been my idea. My husband was Arthur Stevens. He was 32 years old, and he worked as a senior logistics coordinator for a massive, international shipping firm. Arthur was a man of profound, unshakable, deeply ingrained routine. He was incredibly predictable. He was exceptionally safe. He actually read instruction manuals from cover to cover before operating a new appliance. He meticulously checked the tire pressure and the synthetic oil levels on my car every single Sunday morning without me ever having to ask him. He kept an incredibly heavy, fully stocked emergency survival kit in the trunk of his car. He kept an industrial fire extinguisher under our kitchen sink. He maintained a meticulously organized, color-coded spreadsheet for our retirement portfolio. When we went to crowded movie theaters or busy restaurants, he would subtly, quietly check the location of the emergency exits before he even sat down. I remember a massive power outage that hit our neighborhood 3 years into our marriage. The entire grid went completely black during a brutal winter storm. While all of our neighbors were actively panicking, freezing in the dark, Arthur simply walked into the garage. Within 3 minutes, he had a gasoline generator running, portable space heaters safely deployed, and industrial camping lanterns illuminating the living room. He had literally prepared for the dark. He loved me through acts of aggressive, constant, unwavering preparation. And for some incredibly twisted, deeply broken reason inside my own psychology, I absolutely hated him for it. 5 years into our comfortable marriage, the absolute safety he provided felt like a suffocating straitjacket. I desperately wanted spontaneity. I wanted a dangerous, consuming fire. I wanted a man who would dramatically drag me onto a plane to Paris at midnight, not a man who gently, logically reminded me to pack travel-sized sunscreen and electrolyte packets before a road trip. My friends absolutely, entirely despised him. Sloane Harding was 30 years old, and she worked as a high-end luxury real estate agent. Gemma Rossi was 31, and she worked as a freelance interior designer. They were loud, careless, effortlessly beautiful, and lived their entire lives entirely on high-limit credit cards and manufactured social drama. They drank expensive Pinot Grigio on Tuesday afternoons, gossiped viciously about other women, and constantly chased the next emotional high. To them, a good man was simply a boring man. They thrived on chaos. They equated anxiety with passion. How do you even physically breathe around him? Sloane would ask, rolling her eyes in deep disgust as Arthur carefully, methodically packed our cooler with exact, measured ratios of ice and bottled water on the morning of our trip. He acts like we're deploying to an active war zone, not renting a luxury Airbnb with a heated pool. He is so incredibly exhausting to be around. He completely kills the vibe. I absolutely should have defended him. I should have proudly told them that Arthur grew up completely impoverished in a deeply broken home where he never knew where his next meal was coming from. I should have explained that his obsessive, relentless preparation was his trauma response. It was his beautiful, dedicated way of ensuring his chosen family was always safe, always protected, always fed. Instead, I cowardly laughed along. I desperately wanted their approval. I wanted to feel like I was still part of the cool, careless, elite girls club. I let them aggressively poison my view of my own husband. I let them actively convince me that his deep, profound care was actually just pathetic cowardice and a desperate need for absolute control. The prank was Gemma's idea. We had driven the Jeep deep into the national park to see a specific, highly photographed rock formation. Arthur had spent the entire morning filling our hydro flasks, checking the exact GPS coordinates on 3 different digital devices, and packing his heavy, canvas survival backpack with a first aid kit, emergency thermal blankets, and extra protein rations. When we finally got to the site, the midday heat was absolutely suffocating. It physically hurt to breathe the dry air. It felt exactly like walking into an open, blazing oven. The sun was an oppressive, physical weight pressing down on our shoulders. Arthur left his heavy backpack in the trunk of the Jeep to save space in the back seat for Gemma's massive tote bag. He told us to stay inside the car with the air conditioning running on maximum while he walked around a massive, towering sandstone boulder to quickly scout a safe walking path up the rocks for us. He's so incredibly dramatic, Gemma scoffed from the back seat as we watched him disappear behind the massive, red sandstone. It's a designated tourist trail, not Mount Everest. He acts like he's going to discover a new, uncharted continent. I can't stand him. And then, Sloane slowly turned her head and looked directly at me. Her eyes were gleaming with a toxic, reckless, deeply cruel excitement. "Drive," she whispered. "What?" I asked, my hand resting casually on the gear shift. "Drive away," Gemma urged, leaning forward between the front seats, her voice vibrating with adrenaline and malice. "Let's just leave him. Let's make Mr. Survival hike the 8 miles back to the main highway. It'll take him 2 hours. It'll be absolutely hilarious. He desperately needs to loosen up and learn how to take a joke." I looked down at the digital dashboard. 105 degrees. I mathematically knew Arthur had left his water in the trunk. I knew he had his heavy hiking boots on, but absolutely nothing else on his person except his cell phone. And I knew for a documented fact we had 0 cell service out here in the deep valley. The GPS on my phone was already showing a no-signal warning. "I can't do that," I said weakly, feeling a small, dying flutter of conscience in my chest. "It's way too hot out here. It's dangerous. He doesn't have any water." "Oh my God, Sharon, don't be such a boring, pathetic buzzkill just like him," Sloane groaned, leaning over and aggressively hovering her hand near the ignition key, threatening to turn the car off entirely. "We'll drive back to the Airbnb, make a quick picture of margaritas, and we'll drive back and pick him up halfway down the road in exactly an hour. It builds character. Come on, it'll be a legendary story we can tell at dinner parties for the rest of our lives." I looked at the dusty, empty trail. I thought about how deeply annoyed I was when he double-checked my seatbelt that morning. I thought about how badly I wanted Sloane to think I was fun, daring, and unpredictable. I wanted to prove I wasn't just a boring housewife. I put the Jeep in drive, and I aggressively hit the gas pedal. The first 20 minutes of the drive were pure, intoxicating electricity. We were blasting loud pop music, screaming, and laughing hysterically over the rushing wind pouring through the open windows. Sloane was taking a video on her phone, yelling into the camera about how incredibly angry Arthur was going to be when we finally picked him up sweating on the side of the road. "Did you see his face in the rearview mirror?" Gemma cackled from the back seat, wiping tears of laughter from her eyes. "He came around the rock right as we pulled away. He literally looked like a lost, pathetic puppy." I had seen him. I had looked directly in the mirror before the dust completely obscured my view. He had walked out from behind the massive boulder. He had started to jog toward the car, raising his hand, completely confused, assuming I simply hadn't seen him. And then, as the Jeep accelerated, picking up massive plumes of dirt, he had simply stopped. He didn't chase the car. He didn't wave frantically. He just stood completely alone in a massive ocean of blinding, choking dust as I drove his absolute safety away. We drove all the way back to the luxury Airbnb. We turned on the outdoor sound system. We made a massive, icy pitcher of cold, strong margaritas. We put on our expensive designer swimsuits. We sat by the crystal-clear pool, completely insulated from the brutal, lethal reality of the desert just a few miles away. "We should definitely go back now," I said after exactly 1 hour, staring nervously at the blank screen of my phone. 0 missed calls. 0 texts. The ice in my drink had entirely melted. "Give it another 30 minutes, Sloane insisted, pouring herself another heavy drink and reapplying her coconut tanning oil. "Let him really sweat it out. Let him panic a little. He needs to learn he doesn't control absolutely everything in your life. He needs to be humbled." 30 minutes turned into 2 agonizing hours. 2 hours turned into 3. The cold margaritas and the warm, heavy sun made us incredibly lazy. The alcohol effectively numbed the nagging, persistent guilt in my stomach. The adrenaline from the prank completely wore off, leaving behind a heavy lethargy. I actually closed my eyes and fell into a deep, heavy sleep on the padded pool chair. When I violently woke up, the sun was starting to rapidly set. The sky was turning a dark, bruised, terrifying shade of purple. The temperature was dropping fast. Absolute, visceral panic hit my chest like a physical sledgehammer. I couldn't breathe. My heart hammered violently against my ribs. I frantically shook Sloane awake. We scrambled wet into the Jeep. We didn't even bother to dry off or put on our shoes. I tore down the 2-lane highway, pushing 80 miles an hour back toward the park entrance, my hands shaking so violently I could barely keep the steering wheel straight. When we finally reached the long, winding dirt road, the shadows were incredibly long and pitch black. The road was completely, utterly empty. We drove all the way back to the rock formation. The dirt parking spot was empty. The dust was completely settled. There were no footprints visible in the twilight. "Where is he?" I asked, my voice rising in raw, guttural panic. I started screaming his name out the open window. The desert completely swallowed the sound. "He probably hitched a ride with another hiker," Sloane said, but her arrogant, mocking tone was completely gone. She looked absolutely terrified. Her face was entirely pale in the dashboard light. I drove frantically back toward the highway until I found a spot with one single, weak bar of cell service. I aggressively turned my phone off airplane mode. Dozens of missed calls instantly flooded my glowing screen. But they weren't from Arthur. They were from an unknown local number. I listened to the voicemail with the phone pressed hard against my ear, my entire body trembling. It was a local park ranger. "Ma'am, we picked up your husband about 6 miles down the dirt road. He was severely dehydrated, highly disoriented, and experiencing dangerous, advanced stage heat stroke. His core temperature was critical when we found him collapsed near a trail marker. He's being transported by ambulance to the local hospital right now. He asked me to call you from my radio. I dropped my phone directly into the dirt. He didn't have his water. He didn't have his wallet. He had tried to walk the 8 agonizing miles in the blistering, 105-degree desert sun because he implicitly, foolishly trusted that his wife was coming back for him. He waited. He trusted me. And when he finally, devastatingly realized I wasn't coming back, he tried to survive entirely on his own. We drove frantically to the local hospital. I broke every single speed limit. But by the time we ran into the emergency room, tracking wet footprints across the linoleum, Arthur had already been treated with massive pore fluids and discharged against medical advice. He didn't wait for me in the sterile lobby. He didn't call my phone to scream at me. He didn't demand a tearful apology or an explanation. He had simply walked out of the sliding glass doors, got into a local taxi, and completely, permanently vanished from my life. My best friends turned on me instantly. The very second they realized the legal and moral magnitude of what we had done, they violently circled the wagons to protect themselves. "This was your rented car, Sharon," Sloane snapped at me in the hospital parking lot, desperately trying to legally distance herself from the crime. "You were the one sitting behind the wheel. You're the one who actually put it in drive and drove away. We didn't touch the gas pedal. This is entirely on you. I only did it because you told me to." I screamed, sobbing uncontrollably into my hands, falling to my knees on the hot asphalt. "You told me it would be funny. You told me it would build character. They didn't comfort me. They didn't hug me. They didn't tell me it was going to be okay. They booked their own private flights back to the city the very next morning. They completely abandoned me in the desert, exactly like we had abandoned him." The official divorce papers arrived in my mail exactly 6 weeks later. There was no emotional letter attached. There was no demand for a phone call to understand why I did it. He didn't pack his own boxes from our house, he simply hired a moving company to collect his belongings while I was at work. It was just a sterile, thick legal document drafted by a highly aggressive attorney, citing irreconcilable differences and a demand for an immediate, total dissolution of marriage. He didn't want the house. He didn't want his half of our joint savings. He didn't want the cars or the furniture. He just wanted completely, entirely out. He wanted to be permanently severed from my existence. I signed them with violently shaking hands. I knew I had absolutely zero moral or legal right to fight him in court. The next 12 years of my life were a slow, agonizing, completely predictable descent into absolute, unrecoverable ruin. Sloane and Gemma completely ghosted me within 3 months. The drama was incredibly fun for them when it was a joke, but my profound, crushing grief, my deep depression, and my constant crying were far too inconvenient for their curated party lifestyle. They stopped inviting me to brunch. They stopped returning my texts. They unfollowed me on social media. I was entirely alone. I lost my high-paying job in corporate event planning because I simply couldn't focus on the logistics anymore. Every time I looked at a spreadsheet or an itinerary, I remembered Arthur. I started drinking heavily to silence the horrific memory of him standing in the rearview mirror, shrinking into the dusty distance. I eventually married a man named David Sterling. He was 35, an aggressive investment banker. He was loud, chaotic, and completely unpredictable. Exactly what I thought I wanted. Exactly the kind of fire Sloane had told me to chase. But the fire completely burned my house down. David ended up aggressively cheating on me with his 22-year-old secretary. He secretly opened credit cards in my name, drained our joint bank accounts, and left me completely bankrupt in the middle of the night without a single word. I lost the house. My car was repossessed. I had to move into a cramped, dark studio apartment on the bad side of town. It permanently smelled like mildew and stale smoke. The heating barely worked in the winter. The water pressure was terrible. I realized, far too late, that Arthur's predictability wasn't boring. It was the solid, unshakable bedrock that allowed me to live a beautiful, carefree, protected life. And the exact second I arrogantly destroyed that bedrock for a cheap laugh with fair-weather friends, the entire house collapsed on top of me. I spent a decade wondering what happened to the man I left in the dust. I assumed he was broken. I assumed he was lonely. Last month, I hit absolute, undeniable rock bottom. My bank account was completely overdrawn by $300. My credit cards were entirely maxed out, and I was facing a brutal, 30-day eviction notice taped directly to my front door. In a moment of pure, pathetic, agonizing desperation, I typed Arthur's name into LinkedIn. I expected to find him working quietly in a middle management cubicle somewhere. I expected to find him still recovering from the trauma I inflicted on him. Instead, I found an absolute, sprawling empire. Arthur Stevens is now the CEO and founder of a massive, multi-million-dollar ecotourism and outdoor survival brand based in Colorado. He has hundreds of loyal, well-paid employees. He manufactures high-end survival gear. He is happily married to a beautiful, elegant woman. He has 3 healthy, smiling children. He had taken the absolute worst, most traumatic moment of his entire life, the moment he realized his own wife had left him to die in the heat, and he had used that profound trauma to build a fortress. He took the desert that almost killed him, and he completely conquered it. He weaponized his survival skills and turned them into a global brand. Meanwhile, I had spent 12 years turning a perfect, loving life into a barren, lonely wasteland. I borrowed $400 from a predatory, high-interest payday lender, and I bought a cheap, one-way ticket to Denver. I didn't have a plan. I didn't know what I was going to say. I just desperately needed him to look at me. I needed to look into his eyes and apologize for what I did. Or maybe, in the darkest, most pathetic, incredibly selfish part of my rotting soul, I hoped the man who used to carefully check my tire pressure would feel sorry for me. I hoped he would look at my ruined clothes, see how far I had fallen, and write me a check to magically save my life. I hoped he was still the forgiving man I threw away. I walked into his massive, glass-walled corporate headquarters. The lobby was lined with expensive marble and reclaimed wood. I begged the pristine, highly professional receptionist for just 10 minutes of his time, claiming it was a personal emergency. When the heavy oak doors to his corner executive office finally opened, I felt the air violently leave my lungs. He was 44 years old. He looked absolutely incredible. Strong, weathered, wearing an expensive tailored suit over a rugged, comfortable Henley shirt. He looked like a man who completely owned the entire world. He didn't look like the man I left at the rock formation. He looked like a king. He sat comfortably behind a massive, polished mahogany desk. He didn't stand up when I walked in. He didn't look shocked. He didn't look angry. He just stared at me with cold, hollow, completely unreadable eyes. "Arthur," I choked out, hot tears instantly streaming down my face, ruining my cheap makeup. "I am so incredibly sorry. My life is completely destroyed." I stood there in my cheap, wrinkled clothes, pouring out 12 years of absolute misery. I told him about the divorce, the eviction, the brutal betrayal of my friends. I told him how David had stolen my money. I cried until my throat physically burned and my voice was completely hoarse. Arthur didn't say a single word. He didn't interrupt. He didn't offer me a tissue. He just quietly, methodically listened. When I finally stopped sobbing, gasping for air in the perfectly quiet room, he slowly opened the top drawer of his expensive desk. He pulled out a small, crinkled piece of faded thermal paper and a cheap, plastic bottle of Aquafina water. He placed them precisely in the direct center of his immaculate desk. What is this?" I whispered, my hands trembling violently. "It's a receipt," Arthur said. His voice was incredibly deep, resonant, and completely, terrifyingly devoid of human emotion. From the local hospital gift shop in Joshua Tree. 12 years ago. I looked down at the faded paper. When the ranger finally pulled me out of the dirt, Arthur continued, his eyes locking onto mine like a predator observing a dying animal. My core temperature was 104 degrees. My kidneys were beginning to actively fail. I couldn't speak. My lips were cracked and bleeding so badly I couldn't even swallow my own saliva. The ranger bought me a bottle of water from the lobby vending machine while we waited for the doctor to stabilize me. He leaned forward, slowly steepling his fingers together. $2.50, Arthur said softly. That is the exact, mathematical value of my life to you. That is what you left me to die over. A cheap laugh with your toxic friends, and a bottle of water. I sobbed, covering my face with my shaking hands, the absolute shame crushing me into the floor. Arthur, please, I didn't know. I survived you, Sharon, he interrupted, his voice dropping an octave, completely freezing the air in the room. I built this entire empire because I realized that afternoon in the sand that the only person who will ever truly protect me is me. You did not break me. You simply cured me of you. He pointed a single, unyielding finger toward the heavy oak doors. Take the water, he said perfectly calmly. You look incredibly thirsty. And then get out of my building, and never, ever come back. I didn't argue. I couldn't. I picked up the cheap plastic bottle of water, and I walked out of the glass building, completely, utterly destroyed. I flew back to my dark, miserable apartment. I sit here now, looking at that bottle of water sitting on my cheap, scratched coffee table. Arthur didn't yell. He didn't seek public revenge. He didn't try to ruin my reputation or sue me. He didn't need to. He just handed me a $2.50 receipt to show me exactly what I was worth to his new empire. Nothing. Less than nothing. He had built a multi-million-dollar life that would never, ever include me. And I had traded a devoted, loving husband for two toxic friends who couldn't even be bothered to attend my second wedding. The prank was supposed to teach him a lesson. But the joke was entirely, permanently on me. And 12 years later, sitting in the absolute ruins of my life, it still isn't funny. If you respect Arthur for surviving the ultimate betrayal and using it to legally and financially build a massive empire, hit the like button and make sure you subscribe to Silence Speaks. Sharon traded a devoted protector for the approval of toxic friends, and she ended up with absolutely nothing. Arthur didn't need to scream or fight, his massive success and his cold, calculating $2.50 receipt was the absolute ultimate revenge. Drop a crown in the comments if you agree with Arthur's flawless, emotionless response, or a chart decreasing if you think 12 years is too long to hold on to a receipt. We upload new stories of ultimate betrayal and brutal consequences every day. Stay loyal, and stay silent. #ToxicFriends